My wife cheated while I was paying off our mortgage, so I took our house and vanished from her life. Without looking back, I'm a 32-year-old guy who genuinely believed marriage was about loyalty, teamwork, and building a life together. When we bought our house, I felt proud. This was our dream home, a space we could fill with memories, laughter, and everything we had worked for. I was the one juggling long hours at a stable, exhausting job, making sure the mortgage was paid on time, the utilities were covered, and groceries never ran out. I remember walking through the empty rooms on a Sunday evening, imagining the first dinner party we'd host, the smell of fresh paint mixing with the faint scent of new carpet, and feeling this strange warmth, knowing I was building stability for both of us. She'd always tell me, "It'll all balance out once my career picks up, you'll see." And I wanted to believe her so badly. There was pride in being the dependable one, the guy who could shoulder responsibility without complaint. I handled repairs, negotiated with contractors, and even managed landscaping because I thought, why shouldn't I go the extra mile for our shared future? I'd come home tired, bones aching, yet there was a strange satisfaction in knowing our home was secure, that every dollar I spent was a step toward the life we promised each other. But even in those moments of pride, I started noticing little things. Her frequent late nights at work, the way she avoided explaining why she was exhausted or distracted, the faint scent of perfume I didn't recognize on her scarf. I brushed it all aside, convincing myself it was stress or deadlines. Still, a nagging doubt began settling in the corners of my mind, like an itch I couldn't scratch. I told myself, I'm doing the right thing. I'm supporting her, supporting us. That's what marriage is, sacrifice and trust. I didn't realize how blind trust could leave me vulnerable. I just kept paying, kept believing, kept imagining a life we were supposed to share, unaware that the foundation I was building was about to crack. And then one evening, she came home later than usual, her phone buzzing constantly, her smile just a little too practiced. And for the first time, I felt that uneasy chill of uncertainty creeping into the life I thought was solid. At first, I tried to tell myself it was nothing. She had always been ambitious, and I figured long hours and late nights were just part of climbing her career ladder. But the late night texts kept coming, and sometimes her phone would buzz incessantly in the living room, but she'd quickly grab it before I could even glance. There were weekends she worked from home, yet I'd catch faint laughter from her side of the couch, muffled voices, and the occasional glimpse of someone else's reflection in her laptop screen. I questioned my imagination constantly. Was I overreacting? I've always been the guy who overthinks things, I reminded myself, sinking into the excuse that love required patience. Friends began dropping hints. "Hey man, are you sure everything's okay?" one would ask casually, over beers, while I fumed quietly at what I perceived as their interference. I couldn't admit the unease building inside me, so I brushed off every comment. Yet each passing week, the tension in the house grew thicker. Dinner conversations became half-hearted. Her eyes would glaze over when I asked about her day, and her tone would sharpen slightly whenever I probed. The smell of brewed coffee in the kitchen no longer brought comfort. It felt like a marker of absence, of energy and attention being directed elsewhere. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my stress was clouding judgment. But late one night, I noticed the faint perfume scent on her coat. Not mine, not the one she usually wore. Something new and sweet. I swallowed hard and forced myself to laugh it off when she asked why I was staring. "Just tired," I said, convincing her, and mostly myself, that everything was fine. I kept imagining the future we promised each other, the life I was working toward, and told myself that small doubts were just a price for love. Still, deep down, a tiny spark of unease flickered. The house felt heavier, the rooms quieter, and even the sunlight seemed sharper, exposing shadows I didn't want to see. That nagging feeling that I was missing something crucial lingered, but I forced it away, hoping the unease was temporary. Then, one evening, I saw her phone light up with a message she quickly hid, and for the first time, I felt a sinking chill that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't imagining anything. I never imagined I'd feel my stomach drop like that in my own living room. It started as a flicker of curiosity, a tiny itch I could no longer ignore, and before I knew it, I was scrolling through her messages while she was in the shower. And there it was, clear, undeniable, a conversation with another man, full of jokes, flirtations, and plans I wasn't a part of. My hands shook, and I felt this surreal detachment, like I was watching someone else's life collapse in front of me. How could she do this while I'm holding up everything for us? I whispered to myself, the disbelief heavy on my chest. I confronted her immediately. "Who is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady but failing. She froze, eyes darting, and then with practiced calm said, "It's nothing. You're overreacting." That sentence hit me harder than the betrayal itself. Every late night, every extra hour I worked, every dollar I spent on this house, suddenly felt like it was thrown back in my face. The pride I had taken in being the provider vanished in a heartbeat, replaced with anger and humiliation. I couldn't stop replaying the moments that had seemed insignificant. The perfume on her scarf, the whispered laughter, the late-night disappearances. The smell of our home, once comforting, now felt suffocating, mixed with the bitter taste of deceit. I sat on the couch, staring at the walls I had painted myself, feeling like the life I built was a lie. Even when she apologized, claiming it was a mistake and swearing it meant nothing, I couldn't hear her. Her words were hollow, echoing against the reality I had just uncovered. Every room, every corner of our house felt like it held evidence of my own blind trust. And yet, I stayed quiet, swallowing the betrayal, pretending I didn't see the messages, knowing that the fight had only just begun, and that the hardest part of this story hadn't even revealed itself yet. After discovering the messages, life didn't magically explode. It became this tense, suffocating fog. I continued paying the mortgage, covering bills, keeping our home running like clockwork, all while knowing she had betrayed me. Every smile she gave me at the breakfast table felt fake. Every good morning, loaded with hidden truths. I'd watch her from across the room, noticing the way she typed on her phone quickly, hiding it when I looked, and feel this knot of anger and helplessness twist in my stomach. The walls of our home felt smaller, tighter, like they were closing in on me. I could smell the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air, a reminder that someone else had been here, sharing the moments I thought were ours. I confronted her sometimes, in whispers, in rage, but she had this way of turning every accusation back on me. "You're imagining things," she said once, her eyes cold but practiced. "I work hard too. You're just being paranoid." I wanted to scream, to throw something, to break the fragile balance of lies she maintained so carefully, but I held it in, pretending nothing was wrong in front of friends and family. The living room smelled like old coffee, and the faint tang of dust from neglecting myself, from being so wrapped up in paying off our home that I barely slept. I started sleeping on the couch sometimes, letting the silence envelop me, trying to make sense of how someone I trusted could live a double life under the same roof. It became exhausting, both mentally and physically, juggling the image of a happy home while feeling hollow inside. I'd sit late at night, listening to the hum of the heater, imagining a confrontation, imagining the release of truth, but knowing that for now, I had to survive the days without letting her see I was cracking. And just when I thought I could endure the tension a little longer, I noticed her phone buzzing again during dinner. This time, she didn't even glance at me before smiling and slipping out of the room. The knot in my chest tightened, and I realized this story was far from over. By this point, I was exhausted in every sense. Physically drained from long hours at work, mentally spent from pretending everything was fine, and emotionally hollow from the betrayal I couldn't escape. I was carrying the entire mortgage, utilities, groceries, and household maintenance on my own, while she demanded more of my attention, time, and emotional energy. "Can you cover this too?" she asked one evening, sliding a bill across the counter with a casual smile, as if I wasn't already stretched to my limits. I clenched my jaw, forcing a nod, swallowing the resentment that burned in my chest. Every time I tried to bring up her late nights or the distance growing between us, she would deflect with tired excuses or blame me for being too sensitive. Friends and family began noticing the tension, but assumed it was just work stress. "You two always fight when things get hectic," one friend commented casually, and I wanted to scream that it was more than stress. It was betrayal, deception, and a life slowly being stolen from me. Nights alone in the quiet house became unbearable. I could feel the weight of every dollar, every hour, every sacrifice pressing down on me, each one a reminder that my devotion was being taken for granted. The smell of our home, coffee brewing, faint detergent, the lingering perfume she wore, was no longer comforting. It was a constant reminder of her absence, her lies, and the life I was forced to carry alone. Sometimes I would just sit at the kitchen table, staring at bills, imagining walking away, but fear and morality kept me tethered. I hated that I even entertained thoughts of leaving, hated that she could cause me this much pain, and yet, deep down, a quiet resolve was forming. I knew I couldn't go on like this forever, and the first sparks of planning, of taking back control, started flickering. Though I had no idea how far I would have to go to reclaim my life. Then one evening, she mentioned a weekend business trip, and for the first time, I realized she might not even need me around to continue her secret life. And that realization hit me harder than anything before. I thought I had seen it all, thought I had braced myself for every possible betrayal, but nothing prepared me for the day I saw her with him in public. I was running an errand downtown when I walked past a cafe and froze. There she was, laughing, leaning close to another man, their hands brushing across the table in a way that made my chest tighten. The sound of their laughter, casual and intimate, pierced me like glass. I felt detached, like I was watching a movie instead of my own life unraveling. "This isn't happening," I whispered to myself, heart hammering, blood draining from my face. I stood there, unsure whether to confront her or flee, feeling anger, disbelief, and humiliation collide. Passers-by glanced at me, oblivious to the internal storm raging inside. The aroma of fresh coffee and baked bread, once comforting, now seemed taunting, reminding me of stolen mornings and empty promises. I replayed every late-night text, every unexplained absence, every excuse she had ever given. It all clicked, and the betrayal was no longer private. It was public, undeniable, and utterly humiliating. When she noticed me standing outside, her eyes widened, a flicker of guilt, or maybe fear, crossing her face before she quickly masked it with a smile. "Oh, hey, didn't expect to see you here," she said, voice light, casual. That casual tone, after everything, felt like salt in an open wound. I could feel my body shaking, the rage bubbling just beneath the surface. This wasn't just a private affair anymore. It was a blatant disregard for me, for everything I had done, for our life together. I realized in that moment that waiting, hoping, or forgiving was no longer an option. And as I turned to leave, the city noise blurring around me, I felt something shift deep inside. A cold, calculated resolve beginning to take root, promising that the next move wouldn't be mine to suffer through anymore. After that public confrontation of reality, I knew I couldn't continue living like a ghost in my own home. I began quietly planning, every step calculated, making sure I had all my legal and financial bases covered. I reviewed the mortgage papers, double-checked accounts, and consulted with a lawyer under the guise of casual questions about property rights. Every evening, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, going over the numbers, imagining the moment I could finally reclaim control. The smell of the house, coffee, old carpet, faint traces of her perfume, became a background hum to my plotting, a reminder of what I was reclaiming. I felt adrenaline mixed with anger, a strange sense of empowerment growing alongside the hurt. I started preparing essentials quietly, packing documents, personal items, and financial statements. I monitored her patterns carefully, noting when she left the house and how long, creating the perfect window to act without confrontation. It was exhausting, keeping up appearances while meticulously planning, but with every small step, I felt pieces of my old self returning. The man who had once built this life, now taking control of it. I would glance at her laughing at her phone, pretending everything was normal, and feel a cold satisfaction knowing I was steps ahead. The late nights in the study, the quiet hum of the heater, and the dim lighting became my accomplices, shielding me as I crafted a way out. Every time I considered confronting her directly, I reminded myself that power wasn't in yelling or crying. It was in preparation, precision, and timing. The house, once a place of comfort, now felt like a chessboard. And as I sat there one night, calculating, a sense of anticipation coiled in my chest. I knew the moment I had been planning for, freedom, justice, and finally taking back what was mine, was just around the corner. But with every plan comes risk, and I couldn't shake the tension that at any second she might discover my intentions. And that thought made my pulse race in ways both terrifying and exhilarating. Even with plans in motion, I hit a point where despair nearly swallowed me whole. One evening, she casually mentioned her weekend plans with someone from work, laughing like it was nothing, like I wasn't even there. The weight of all those months, every dollar I paid, every late night at work, every sacrifice I made, crashed down on me at once. I felt utterly invisible, like a ghost trapped in my own life, powerless to reclaim the love and trust I had poured into this marriage. I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the ceiling, the faint hum of the heater mixing with the smell of old carpet and lingering perfume, and I felt like I was losing not just her, but myself. I replayed every moment, every lie, every small red flag I had ignored, wishing I had seen them sooner. Anger swirled with sadness, creating a dizzying storm inside me. I remembered our first home tour, how I'd imagined a life filled with laughter, dinners, and shared victories, and now all of it felt like a cruel joke. I could barely eat, barely sleep, haunted by the thought that I had been so blind, so trusting, that someone I loved could treat me like I didn't exist. The silence of the house became deafening, every creak and groan a reminder of the life I thought I had. For a moment, I considered giving up entirely, letting her keep everything and disappearing quietly, broken. But somewhere in that pit of despair, a spark ignited, a resolve to reclaim what was rightfully mine, to finally turn the tables, no matter how painful or complicated. The storm inside me shifted from helplessness to strategy, anger to calculated determination. And as I stared out the window at the quiet street, I realized one thing with absolute clarity. I wasn't going to let betrayal define the rest of my life, and the next move would be mine to make. The day finally came, when everything I had been planning started falling into place. I woke up early, heart pounding, and double-checked every document, every account, every detail that would allow me to secure the house and reclaim my life. I packed my essentials quietly, moving like a ghost through the home I had built for both of us, making sure nothing would alert her to what was happening. The faint scent of coffee brewing in the kitchen and the quiet hum of the heater accompanied me, a strangely comforting soundtrack as I worked through my checklist. I could feel adrenaline surging through my veins, a mix of fear, exhilaration, and anticipation. Every careful step brought me closer to freedom, and the thought of finally taking control made my chest feel lighter despite the tension. She left for work, none the wiser, and I watched her car pull away before locking the doors behind me. The house, which had been a prison of deception and betrayal, now felt like the arena for my victory. I walked through each room one last time, imagining her shocked expression when she realized I had anticipated everything. Every creak of the floorboards and faint smell of detergent reminded me of the months I had carried the weight of our life alone. My hands shook slightly as I signed the final papers, the pen feeling heavier than I expected, marking the moment when I transitioned from victim to someone reclaiming their power. And as I stepped out, locking the door behind me, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The city outside buzzed with life, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded. I knew the coming days would bring confrontation, tension, and perhaps fury, but I also knew that I had orchestrated my exit with precision. And for the first time in months, I felt truly free, like a man walking away from a life that had tried to break him. But even as I drove away, heart still hammering, I couldn't help but glance back at the house one last time, knowing she would soon realize just how carefully I had reclaimed what was mine. I could have faced her, shouted, begged, or demanded answers, but I realized that giving her the satisfaction of a confrontation would only feed her control over me. Instead, I chose silence, letting the law and the papers speak louder than any argument ever could. I left letters in plain sight, detailing the betrayal, the lies, and the legal actions I had taken, ensuring there would be no room for denial. The ink on the pages felt heavier than I expected, each word a release, each sentence a small triumph over months of humiliation. I imagined her reading them, feeling the same shock and helplessness I had felt when I discovered the affair, and a quiet satisfaction settled in my chest. I watched from a distance as she finally noticed the letters. Her eyes widened, lips parting, a flicker of panic flashing before she masked it with anger. "What is this?" she muttered under her breath, scanning the documents, but there was nothing she could do. Every carefully planned step I had taken, mortgage, finances, legal ownership, was untouchable. I realized then that power didn't come from yelling or confrontation. It came from preparation, patience, and taking control without letting the other person know until it was too late. The smell of fresh ink from the letters mixed with the faint perfume she left behind, a strange reminder of both betrayal and liberation. I felt a heavy tension release from my shoulders, a deep satisfaction in knowing she could no longer manipulate or undermine me. This quiet victory, orchestrated without a single shouted word, felt more satisfying than any confrontation could have. And as I walked away from the house that had been my prison, the street around me buzzing with oblivious life, I felt the first true sense of freedom in months. But a part of me couldn't help wondering how long it would take her to realize she had lost everything to someone she had underestimated. Once the letters were delivered and the legal steps completed, I knew it was time to disappear completely. I changed routines, avoided familiar places, and cut every line of communication. The house, once a prison of lies and betrayal, now belonged entirely to me in spirit. I had claimed my freedom without her knowing the full extent of my plans. I packed the last of my personal items quietly, savoring the calm thrill of reclaiming my life. The faint smell of detergent and coffee lingered, but it no longer weighed me down. It became a marker of what I was leaving behind. Driving away from the street I had walked daily for years, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: lightness. Each mile took me further from the betrayal, the lies, and the emotional drain I had endured. I thought about the life I was building for myself now, independent, free, and unshackled by deceit. Memories of her laughter and her casual betrayals flickered like old photographs, but instead of pain, they fueled my sense of triumph. I imagined her discovering the absence, the letters, the legal changes, and the realization that I had vanished from her life forever. Even as the city faded behind me, I felt the tension of the past months slowly release from my chest. The house, the debts, the manipulation, all were finally behind me. And as I settled into the first night in my new place, quiet and alone, I realized that freedom carried with it a strange kind of peace. Yet deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of a life rebuilt, and that whatever came next, I would face it on my terms, without looking back. And as I turned off the lights and listened to the silence around me, I felt an unfamiliar but welcome sensation: control, power, and the quiet satisfaction of being truly free. Months later, I sit in my new apartment, sunlight spilling over a space that is mine completely, physically, emotionally, and mentally. The weight of betrayal that once crushed me feels distant now, replaced by clarity and strength I didn't know I could have. I reflect on every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment I ignored red flags, and I understand how much I grew through the pain. The house I left behind, the confrontation I avoided, even her shock and fury, all became symbols of the life I refused to let define me. I rebuilt not just financially, but emotionally, setting boundaries, reclaiming my pride, and learning that self-respect isn't given, it's taken. Sometimes I think about her, about the shock when she realized I had disappeared from her life completely. There's no anger left, no desire for revenge beyond what I already orchestrated. I've reclaimed my power and my narrative. The faint thrill of that calculated triumph lingers, but it's accompanied by peace, the kind that comes from knowing I finally chose myself. I've rebuilt relationships with friends and family who saw my pain, strengthened my career, and allowed myself to dream again without compromise. Each morning, I wake up in a space that smells like possibility, not betrayal, and it's intoxicating. I realize that empowerment isn't always loud or dramatic. It can be quiet, precise, and absolute. The man I was when this began, exhausted and invisible, no longer exists. I am the architect of my own life now, free from manipulation, free from lies, and finally, fully in control. And as I sip my coffee, sunlight warm on my face, I know this: the betrayal that once broke me taught me how to rebuild stronger, smarter, and unshakably. My past may have shaped me, but it will never control me again.